Hello and welcome to the English Box. Today we're going to talk about the past perfect simple and the past perfect continuous tenses. So let's begin by looking at the structure of the past perfect simple. Here we have two examples. I had eaten the cake and he had seen the movie. Both these examples are in the past perfect simple, and we can see that we begin with the subject, in these cases I and he. Then we always have the auxiliary, had, followed by the past participle form of the verb. So eaten or seen are the past participles of the verbs to eat and to see. And finally we have the complement, in these cases the cake and the movie. Moving on from the structure of the past perfect simple, we can look at the past perfect continuous. The past perfect continuous is formed with the subject, then the auxiliary had, and then been, the past participle of the verb to be, then the verb with ing, followed by the complement. For example, I had been jogging around the lake, and it had been raining. So it, the subject, had, the auxiliary, been, and then raining, the verb with ing. To make negative and question sentences is very simple. To make a negative sentence, all you have to do is add not to the auxiliary had, so it becomes had not, or contracted hadn't. So we have two examples. I hadn't eaten the cake, and it hadn't been raining. To make a question, all you have to do is to swap or change the positions of the auxiliary verb and the subject. So the auxiliary verb had comes first, followed by the subject. The examples here: had I eaten the cake, and had it been raining. So a quick exercise for you: if you would like to pause the video, you have to change the first three sentences into negative past perfect simple sentences, and the second three sentences into questions. So pause the video, do the exercise, and then we'll move on. Okay, so here are the answers. The first one should read, I hadn't already seen the film. Number 2, she hadn't turned on the computer. And number 3, we hadn't been awake all night. And the questions: had they earned a lot of money? Had you known him for a long time? And finally, had it been raining for a few hours? So now we've looked at the structure. What about the use of the past perfect simple? And how is the use of the simple form different to the continuous form? Well, I've made a little diagram for you here to hopefully make it a little bit easier to understand. We have the past simple action is the purple square, and the past perfect action is the round red circle. So you can see that the past perfect action always happens before the past simple action. So we use the past perfect simple to talk about actions which happened before another action in the past. For example, I hadn't studied English before I went to Scotland. The hadn't studied is the past perfect, and went is the past simple. The action of studying didn't happen before I went to Scotland. In number 2, we have another example. She had finished her homework when her father arrived home from work. So before her father arrived home, she finished her homework. The red action happened first. So that's what we use the past perfect simple for. But what about the past perfect continuous? Well, we can see now that the past perfect continuous is used to talk about the action and its duration before another action or point in the past. For example, they had been talking for 2 hours when the boss arrived. Or I had been studying German for a year before I moved to Berlin. Or the final example, it had been raining, there were puddles everywhere. We often use the past perfect continuous in preference to the past perfect simple to talk about the duration of the action and to show that the action happened just up to the point in the past simple time or action. So just before this past simple action occurred, we were doing something else. Okay, so to summarize, the past perfect simple is used for actions completed before another action in the past. For example, we didn't get a table at the restaurant because we hadn't booked. Or the duration of an action before something in the past. For example, we had lived in Germany for 5 years before we moved to France. Similarly, we can use the past perfect continuous to emphasize this duration. So we had been living in Germany for 5 years before we moved to France. And we often use the past perfect continuous to display, to show, to express the cause of something in the past. So Ben was tired because he had been playing football. The reason he was tired was because he had been playing football. Okay, finally we have an exercise here for you. You have 4 groups of sentences. 2 of each group mean the same thing, and you have to decide which 2 sentences mean the same thing. So pause the video again, read the sentences, and decide which 2 sentences are the same in meaning. Okay, are you ready for the answers? So, number 1, he had finished work when I got there. Number 2, he finished work when I got there. And number 3, he finished work when I got there. Number 1 and number 2 are the same. Okay, so he had finished work when I got there and he finished work before I got there. In the next one, the yellow sentences, she spoke and then I sat down when she spoke, and I sat down when she had spoken. Number 1 and number 3 are the same. In the pink sentences, she was sick when I last saw her, I last saw her after her illness, and she had been sick when I last saw her. Number 2 and number 3 are the same. And finally, with the green sentences, they had been arguing when I met them, they were arguing when I met them, and I heard them arguing. Number 2 and number 3 are the same. So you were witness, you saw them arguing. In number 1, it happened before you saw them.